Hello, Rob here again, and I'm back today to reveal the only 7 plugins that you'll ever need to produce great mixes. Now, as soon as you're aware of what these 7 things are, you can just forget about everything else, stop getting distracted, because these really are the core 7 types of plugin that you need to produce amazing radio quality, professional music in your home studio. So let's not waste any more time. What are those 7 plugins? Well, first of all, and we're kind of working in order of importance here, you have EQ, and this is of course super important. No way you can mix without EQ. And then second to that is compression. So EQ is the tool that you use to manage the tonal balance of your individual parts or the overall mix, whereas compression is the tool that you use to maintain the dynamics of the individual channels and your overall mix or anywhere else. So really important, EQ for tonal adjustments, compression for dynamic adjustments. But then after that, even though they're the 2 main ones by a long shot, there are of course 5 more plugins that are really important. And I'm just going to list through them now before I talk about them in a bit more detail. So those plugins are a limiter, a reverb, a delay, a trim plugin, and a gate. So I'm going to jump straight into my DAW and go through each of these, because I'm assuming you already understand the importance of EQ and compression, because you really can't mix without them, and they are by far the 2 most important plugins. But I want to talk about the others a bit more and why I chose those ones specifically. And this entire mix here is done with those 7 plugins. Let's have a quick listen. So it's sounding pretty good. Now let's go over those one by one. So first of all, we've got the limiter, which technically is a form of compression. A limiter is simply a compressor that, instead of adjusting the ratio to maybe 2:1 or 3:1, where for every 2 decibels the source goes over the threshold, it reduces it by that ratio. So 3:1, it would reduce it to a third, 2:1, it would half it. Instead, with a limiter, this ratio is infinity, or really, really high, so that the audio never actually goes above the threshold. As soon as the audio hits the threshold, it stops there. And limiters are important, not so much on individual channels, but if you're producing your own music in your studio and you don't want to send it off and pay for mastering, that kind of stuff, limiters are important on your mix bus just to make your mix loud. So you want to maintain good headroom throughout. So you'll see all of my channels have got plenty of headroom. So barely touching this light green, and that's what you want, loads of headroom. But then on your mix bus or your output, you want to add a limiter as the last step. So here I'm just using the stock Pro Tools limiter, and this is important because without this, listen to the level. And then when I turn it on, so pretty simple. All you do is set the ceiling to -0.1 and adjust the threshold until you're seeing 2 or 3 dB of gain reduction. I try to stick low. I liked the aggressive sound of a bit more on this, so you saw 3 dB there, but try to keep it around 1 or 2 dB. That's it. That's a limiter. That's why that's important. Now, trim plugins. So if you don't know what that is, then that might have confused you a bit. And you can see here on pretty much every single channel, I've got a trim plugin. Now, different DAWs will have a different name for this, but this is literally a plugin that allows me to adjust the gain of the channel. And I'm adjusting the gain here before the fader, and this is the important thing. We're adding it first. So this is before our plugins, before our sends, before our volume fader, and before everything that comes after that. Now, what I'm doing here is just reducing the gain of certain channels that are a bit loud so that we've got more headroom. It's that simple. So this channel here, for example, let's oh, that one's muted. Let's choose a channel like this. So the snare bottom, and you can see here I've got a big chunk. Now without that, you can see it's getting quite close to 10 here. It's nowhere near 0, but I still like to have, things sitting around between -15 and -20. So when I bring this trim plugin in, you can see now I've got loads of headroom and I don't have to worry. So I literally go through every mix at the beginning. You don't have to be too fastidious with this. Just notice if any of these tracks are a bit hot. So if I bypass all of these, They're all a bit hot for my liking. I'm kind of weird about this. I like to have loads of headroom. So then here I'm just adding -10, -10, -10, just copied this across, -10, -10. And now, loads of headroom. So that's why trim plugins are important, because a lot of people don't understand the importance of gain stage and recording at a low level around -18 ideally, and then just before you start mixing, just going through and eyeballing it. If there's any channels that look hot, they're getting up to this area around here, just add a trim plugin or a gain plugin, whatever it's called in your DAW, and cut some dBs off. So that's why that's important. And then we have reverb and delay. And even though they're very subtle in my mixes especially, I don't like to use a lot of reverb and delay. Some people use loads of reverb. I think it sounds unprofessional, but unless it suits the genre. But for this track, not much reverb at all. So if I actually mute the reverb, so this is the room reverb channel here. First of all, always put a reverb on an effects channel so you can send different instruments by different amounts. So let's have a listen. That's with, this is without. Back in. It's pretty subtle. We just add in more depth to the mix, which is what reverb is important for, adding depth, creating this back wall. And by sending some things more, so you can see my sends are kind of all over the place. This one's being sent a lot more, the piano, than the acoustic guitar, and that's because I wanted to put the piano further away from the listener so that it sounds like it's further away. There's more reverb. Literally, it's that simple. So reverb's important for creating depth and to use as an effect. I generally don't use reverb on vocals though, which is why delay is important. And delay is important on vocals because with most mainstream stuff, you can use delays to create a space instead. So if we have a listen to the vocal. 'Cause my routine has blurred into one. So we've got a few things going on here. We've got a mono delay. 'Cause my routine has blurred into. Just tucked underneath. We've got a stereo delay. 'Cause my routine has blurred into one. Again, just tucked underneath to give it a bit of space, and that's just a stereo delay with a different time on the left to the right and a low feedback. And then I've got things like this delay throw. So if I jump into here and take a look at this, and you can see here I'm automating send A, which is where that delay was, and just have a listen to this word, how it the delay turns on just for this one. How it's come to be. Hear that? So it's a lot more pronounced in the mix. How it's come to be. So that's just to fill in this gap where there's no vocal. So delay is important for adding interest, for adding space to vocals, and a few other reasons. So that leaves us with one more plugin, which is a gate. And gates are important on drums because have a listen to this snare with a gate on it. Sounds weird in solo, right? But now listen to it in the mix. How it's come to. So the snare has nice aggression, it's got some nice top end, it's got some nice snap to it. But then when I bypass this gate, have a listen. What's happened? Suddenly the cymbals are much louder, the hi-hat's much louder. And that's because snare mics always have bleed from the cymbals and the hi-hat in them. And if you leave that bleed in, which some people do and that's fine, but I find it really limits me on the processing I can add on the snare. So if I want to make the snare sound really bright and aggressive, it then affects the hi-hat and the cymbals as well. So instead I've just got a gate here and you just set the threshold with a slow release so it sounds natural, attack as fast as it'll go, and just adjust the threshold until every snare hit comes through. So that's it, same on the kick. With the gate and then so gates are important mostly on drums. So that's it, the 7 plugins that you need. EQ and compression, which you can see all over the place. VMR, wherever it says VMR, this is a Slate virtual mix rack, so it's either EQ or compression. I've got a trim plugin there as well. But apart from that, reverb, trim, and then there are some exceptions. So things like amp simulation, I'm not going to include because that's kind of like a virtual instrument. Time adjust, that's just to fix some phasing issues, but I could have done that by just moving the clip. So not including that, but apart from that, it's all trim, EQ, compression, reverb, delay, limiting just on the master bus. I'm not using a limiter anywhere else here. And then finally, your gate as well. So that's it. They're the 7 plugins. Hope you find that useful. Try and stick to just those. Forget everything else because you don't need anything else. Your DAW should come with all of those. If it doesn't, then you might just have to buy 1 or 2 plugins, but I highly doubt it. So your DAW probably comes with all 7 of those plugins. That's all you need to produce great music and mixes in your home studio. So leave a comment below. Do you think there's a plugin that I've missed out? Let me know. Or do you think there's a plugin that I should emphasize more? What plugins do you rely on most?